All righty. Still got a couple of people coming in here. All right. We'll go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today for our Trinity website editor training series. We've been doing a few of these. This is our third one, I believe. We're going to continue doing these with varying topics, and we do look for feedback from everybody. If you have topics that you would like us to cover in the future, we'd love to hear about it. And we'll talk about that again at the end. Anywho, I'm Alex Verhoeven. I'm a member of the Trinity Web Support team at Duke Web Services. And joining me today also is Andy Smith, my fellow Trinity Web developer, and I believe our team lead at Duke Web Services, Dave White, as well. And we're also joined today by the newest members of the Trinity Communications team, Riley Phillips and Jess Abel. And I just want to take a quick moment to welcome them to the team and say that we're all looking forward to working with you and seeing how you take Trinity Communications forward into the future with us. All righty, we'll go ahead and get started here. Today, we are going to cover the topic of managing member profiles on your website, what editors can control and what they don't. This is probably the most complex aspect of managing your website. It's one that we tend to get the most questions about and the most support requests for. So I hope that we can provide a lot of helpful information today and that we're able to answer any questions that you may have for us.
Yeah.
All right, today we'll be talking about a number of different topics related to member profile management. We'll talk about why it's so confusing to manage these profiles. We'll talk about how data flows into your Drupal website, how profiles are added. We'll talk a bit about Trinity Directory Tool and how that fits into the workflow and how content is managed in there. We'll discuss classes and categories that are part of the profiles. And we'll discuss local fields, which are fields that you can edit within your website. We'll also talk about what you cannot edit. We'll discuss a bit about how and where profiles appear on pages and on your website in the people section. We'll cover a few things that tend to make your job a little more difficult in managing these profiles. And we'll have some troubleshooting tips and some links to resources as well. And then at the end, we'll take any questions that you may have for us. So why is it so confusing to manage member profiles on your website? Well, the profiles, while they look like they live on your website, don't only live in Drupal. They come from a number of different systems that are all tied together, and the data that creates that profile on your website cascades down from the Duke systems of record and through some management systems, and then ultimately into your website. Another thing that can be confusing is that changes that you make don't always appear immediately. And while editors can manage where profiles display on the website, profile data must almost always be changed at its source in the system of record. So how does data flow into your Drupal website? This workflow diagram illustrates where profile
Okay,
data
why can't
comes
I hear
from
it?
and how it is routed through various systems before it ends up on your website. As you can see, there are two different workflows, one for people with Scholars at Duke profiles and one for people without Scholars at Duke profiles. Scholars at Duke profiles should only be used for faculty or other department members who have actual scholarly data to display in Scholars. We definitely do not recommend using Scholars profiles for staff members, for example, because doing so really complicates the workflow and makes it more difficult for you to manage your staff information on your website. So for department members with Scholars at Duke profiles, the most basic information comes from Duke's HR systems of record. A DFAC for professional name and preferred title, as well as faculty appointments. Duke at Work for phone numbers and addresses, and account self-service for email addresses. That information is then fed into Scholars at Duke, where it's combined with a person's scholarly data like publications, education, and so forth. The next layer of the workflow is the Trinity directory tool, where you are able to manage information that is not available in Scholars, like administrative positions such as chair or director of graduate studies, for example. Finally, all of this information is fed to your website where there are some additional pieces of local data that can be added or modified. These include local categories, research areas, administrative email addresses, local administrative positions, which may be non-standard, and joint or secondary appointments. And we'll talk about all of these shortly here. Department members without Scholars at Duke profiles, such as staff members, also get their basic data from Duke at Work and account self-service. That information is then fed to the Trinity directory tool where you can add a profile photo, profile overview, working title, and any applicable administrative positions such as business manager or DUSA, for example. That data is then fed from the Trinity directory tool to your Drupal website where the same local data items can be adjusted that we discussed for the previous workflow. One difference to note between Scholars and non-Scholars profiles is that on your website, when you click on a profile that's imported from Scholars, it will link directly to that Scholars profile. Non-Scholars profiles like staff members will link to a local profile page that lives on the website itself. If you're responsible for maintaining the department member information on your website, it is important that you also have power user access to the Trinity directory tool, and it's also very useful to be a power user in Scholars at Duke as well. So these are the common workflows for how profiles are added. Faculty, which are going to be the most common profiles that you have, come from Scholars, go through the Trinity directory tool, and then onto your Drupal website. Staff comes from Trinity directory tool, straight to your Drupal website. And then there is the option of creating local profiles. These profiles are created directly in the Drupal website, and it is not recommended to use those. There are some very rare use cases where you might want to consider using a local profile, and that would be something along the lines of having a visiting faculty member from a different institution that has no data within the Duke systems of record, like if there was a professor visiting from Carolina, for example. And let's talk a little bit about the Trinity Directory tool. So the Trinity Directory tool is a web application that sort of serves as the middleware or aggregator between the HR systems and scholars and our websites. In the Trinity Directory tool, you can manage group memberships, and that's also where we manage actual groups themselves, where they are created if they're not part of scholars groups. But that is where you would control whether or not someone is part of your group that is your department group. Trinity Directory Tools also used to manage administrative positions. As I mentioned before, this is where you would set your chair appointment or your business manager, director of graduate studies, etc. Those positions are all managed there. And one of the other primary functions is that that's where staff information is managed because that doesn't come from scholars. So any staff or other non-faculty profile data comes from the directory tool. Directory tools also used to control which courses are available to be displayed on your website if your department chooses to do that. Not all departments show their courses, but some do, and that is where we can control which courses are displayed there. The data in the directory tool is primarily managed by power users that are designated by us. If you need to become a power user in the directory tool, you can just contact us and we'll add you. That gives you the ability to control those group memberships and administrative positions, etc. And staff are also able to manage their own information in a limited manner. While some of the information comes from systems of record and cannot be changed there, they do have the ability to change their profile picture and their profile um, bio, for example. The working title that is managed there can only be changed by power users. So that's an important thing to note. The directory tool has very extensive help documentation inside the application, both for power users and for staff members who are in there managing their information. We have user guides that are in the left-hand navigation, but on almost all of the management sections, there's a section at the bottom of the page that explains everything that's going on the page and what you can and can't do there, and also where the data is coming from if you need to, if you're trying to hunt that down. Next, I'll talk a little bit about classes and categories. Classes and categories are imported data that comes from HR, from PeopleSoft, and from DFAC. The classes are the most basic designation for a profile type. So that would be faculty, staff, postdocs, and graduate students. Those are the only four types that are available to us from those systems, and that's what's available to us in Scholars. And the same goes for categories, which applies to faculty. So these are the appointments that come from DFAC. And the three that are used are primary faculty, secondary faculty, and joint faculty. Those are the only three, again, that come from the systems of record. Um, so so that's a limitation that we have to deal with. Let's see. There may be situations where categories don't align with the profile that you're managing for a department member. This might include emeriti or visiting faculty or affiliations that are not official in DFAC. Anything that's non-standard has to be managed locally on your website. So once the information is imported into your website, the profiles are available there and can be edited. And when you go in to edit one of these profiles, you'll see a local data tab and an imported data tab. The only things that are editable for an editor are the fields that are under the local data tab. And we'll talk a little bit about what those fields are here. So again, this is information that's not imported. It basically augments the information that is imported and lets us refine some categorizations primarily. So the first field is the local scholars at Duke category. That's where we can assign a category when one doesn't exist on the profile, one isn't imported. That's generally going to happen with affiliated faculty, so someone who doesn't have an actual appointment in DFAC. The local category is a customized list of categories specific to a department used to group memberships into non-standard pages. So, for example, professors, assistant professors, instructors, etc. This requires customization and makes management a little more complex. We would definitely help out if that's something you're interested in setting up, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The research areas are used on department specific. The research areas are department specific, so that's basically a set of terms that we customize for a department that are used as tags on a profile. So if there are research areas that are highlighted on a website, say a department has 5 specific research areas, this would allow them to show a grid of the faculty that are associated with those research areas on those pages. And so they would dynamically show up on those pages based on being tagged with those research areas. Some more local fields that you have control over are administrative email. This is where you would enter an alternate email address for somebody that would be used in place of the personal address if that member profile holds an administrative position. So there are cases where departments set up a specific email inbox for their director of undergraduate studies. So they might have a DUS at something.duke.edu address that is where they want that all, the website contact for the DUS to go to. So putting that email address into that field would override their personal email address and direct their contact link um, to that inbox. Most administrative position assignments come from the directory tool and are standardized to meet the position titles most commonly used by all departments, like chair, DUS, DUSA, DGS, etc. But you would use this field to add non-standard positions. For example, visual arts coordinator is one that might be used in the Department of Art History, and Visual Studies. Some faculty want to display their appointments in other departments. By default, we only show the preferred appointment and title there. But this is where you would be able to add a secondary or joint appointment should they want to display that information on a profile. What you cannot edit on a profile. If the field is not on the local data tab, it can't be edited in Drupal. So this would include the name, which comes from DFAC, or account self-service, appointment title, which comes from DFAC, working title from Trinity Directory Tool, or email from account self-service. Those are all locked and come from the systems of record. So should you need to change any of these, you have to go up to where that information is sourced and make the changes there. And it will then cascade down back to your website, generally within 24 to 48 hours or so. How profiles appear on pages. So pages in the people section are dynamically generated based on classes and categories. So the standard classes and categories that we discussed, such as a class of faculty and a category of primary faculty, that would automatically display that profile on the primary faculty page without any intervention on your part. So if your department is using just the standard classes and categories to separate the profiles into pages, that stuff happens automatically and you don't have to do anything there. A number of departments do choose to categorize their member pages differently. For example, instead of showing primary faculty and secondary faculty pages, they might want to show professors, assistant professors, instructors, emeriti, and so on. This definitely adds some complexity to managing your profile pages, but we have very good documentation that explains how you can create and manage these custom groupings. And of course, we're always available to help you out with setting these things up and helping you manage them as well. So if you get stuck, just never hesitate to let us know and we'll help you out with these categorizations. So I'll just review some of the things that we talked about that make managing these member profiles more difficult. Keeping staff profiles in Scholars at Duke, that definitely complicates matters. It basically adds an additional layer of workflow that doesn't need to be there. Really, again, the only reason to have a profile in Scholars is if you have scholarly data. And that sometimes that does apply to staff. Some staff teach courses, can be instructors, things along those lines. And in that case, it would make sense. But in almost all cases, we recommend not keeping staff profiles in Scholars. As I just discussed, customizing faculty groupings and categorizations, that also adds a layer of complexity. It's pretty commonly done, and we do manage that on a number of different websites. But it does involve more, figuring out where things are and how you have to tag things manually to make profiles show up where you expect them to. Also adding faculty that don't have a DFAC appointment in your department. We always recommend that if someone is technically a part of your department, it should be coming from DFAC. So we try to avoid in as many cases as possible, overriding the system of record. So that also adds a layer of complexity as well. Just some troubleshooting tips. One of the more common requests we get is, or issues that people run into, is when they have a new faculty member in the department, they don't show up where they expect them to. So the first thing to check is, does this person have a scholars profile? They should have automatically had a scholars profile created for them, and they should be in your department's group in scholars as well. So it's important to check that A, that they're there, and B, that they're a member of the right group. Again, since there are multiple systems at work that cascade the data, there are delays. It's these systems generally run 1 or 2 times a day to import. So it can take 24, sometimes up to 48 hours for changes to go from the very top of the workflow to the website. If you have situations where you urgently need something to show up faster, we can definitely help expedite that by doing manual imports. So you can always let us know if you have that need. Another reason that a faculty member might not be showing up is, again, if you're doing custom categorization on your website, such as professors, assistant professors, associate professors, you would need to make sure that the profile that was imported has been tagged with that correct category. Um, and then as far as the local category override, that is also a thing to look at if someone is displaying on the wrong page. A staff member missing is almost always the fact that they haven't been added to the group in Trinity directory tool. So you or whoever is the power user for the tool needs to go in and make sure that they're in there. And if they're not a member of your group, you just need to add them, and then they should within 24 hours appear on your website. And of course, if all else fails, contact us at trinitywebsupport@duke.edu. We're always here to help you figure out what might be going wrong if you run into an issue. So just to sum up what we've talked about, profiles come from a number of external systems. Drupal controls the display, but not the source data for the profiles. Local fields are the main tool you have on your website to manage the display of profiles on your website. And extensive resources can be found in our training and documentation website. Highly recommend that everybody start there first. We work really hard to keep that documentation current and up to date. I'd like to think that we have 95% of the issues that you may run into covered in our documentation. But of course, again, if you run into a question that you don't find an answer to, you can just shoot us an email. We'll be sharing this set of slides, so you'll have these links available. But again, drupal.trinity.duke.edu is a great place to start when you have any question as to how to manage anything about your website. So we'll share this slide deck with these links should you need those in the future.